And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Tuesday morning, showing a swath of IFR here associated with the snow from the Brooks Range southwestward down over the southeastern and eastern Bering Sea, right into the eastern Aleutians, and then eastward there into Kodiak Island. IFR along the Alaska Range here, and also up over Kenai Peninsula and the North Gulf Coast, especially Prince William Sound, and the southeast coast, mostly marginal. For the afternoon, this area kind of retreating back to the west and a little bit to the northwest there. So we've got IFR along and south of the Brooks Range, down across the Seward Peninsula, across Norton Sound, and then right on down to the south here again to the Alaska Peninsula area. And IFR still along the Aleutian Range on up into the western Alaska Range, but becoming marginal VFR for the central area, like around Windy Pass or so. VFR for the Copper River Basin, also up here in the interior, as well as the North Slope in the Arctic coast, looking pretty good. IFR here holding western Prince William Sound, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula in toward the Barren Islands, extending southeastward there, but staying off this panhandle. Some VFR showing up for the southeast coast tomorrow afternoon. Out to the west, a couple of bands IFR here over the western Bering there, mostly north of Adak and Atka. Then for the afternoon, that area of IFR here, or for the morning hours Wednesday, stays to the north of the Aleutians, so leaving the Aleutian chain in marginal VFR as well as much of the remainder of the Bering Sea. And this area of IFR with the snow continuing, kind of lifting up into the Brooks Range now, some of that spilling over into the North Slope, and then good IFR right on down the west side here into Bristol Bay. And with that southeast flow, still looking at IFR, southern and eastern Alaska Peninsula or Alaska Range areas, and also IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula. Looks like solid IFR now pushing into the panhandle of that front, and then that improves, lingering here to the north and over toward the border, but marginal VFR down toward Dixon Entrance, and IFR for the North Gulf Coast with some VFR now for the Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet, maybe even Kodiak Island. Just some leftover marginal VFR along the Alaska Range. Otherwise, IFR, this area pulling back to the northwest here, western Seward Peninsula, up across the northwest coast into the western North Slope. And another system here, IFR up over the northern Bering Sea, and another batch down over the eastern Aleutians, spreading into the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at the passes for Anatufik and Adigan, IFR for sure tomorrow for both passes there in the Brooks Range. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR for rainy and windy, marginal VFR. Isabel looks marginal, but Mentasta should be seeing a VFR day, either approach. And Tanita, possibly marginal at times. And Portage, IFR. Chilcoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels here, 2,000 feet south of the area here, just east of Kodiak Island. And at the surface there along the North Gulf Coast here, and up into northern Bristol Bay, and then kind of meandering across the Bering Sea. Icing with that area of snow here, looking for considerable moderate rime icing from the central Brooks Range right down southwest to Nunivak Island, and then another system out here pushing not quite an area of considerable moderate icing into the western Aleutians there. And with the front here, lifting northward, increasing icing here coming in, looks like the heaviest icing into Montague Island by afternoon. And light to isolated moderate icing here across south central Alaska, Kuskokwim Delta down to the Alaska Peninsula. And the jet stream showing west-southwest flow, or mostly southwest flow at about 60 knots over the interior, south 65 in the Gulf of Alaska, but southwest 90 knots for the central Arctic coast there, and then back out to the west, northwest flow 65 knots, 9,000 feet here. Low pressure coming northward here into the southeastern Bering Sea again, so quite an area of southerly winds, 50 to 70 knots coming in with that system. And then up here along the Arctic coast, pretty strong winds out of the west, 50 to 55 knots. And then for 3,000 feet, 70 knots southeast winds here right into southern Cook Inlet across the Barren Islands and in advance of the front here as it lifts slowly northward into the Gulf of Alaska. Lighter over the interior, except up there on the Arctic coast, westerlies up to 40 knots. Easterlies or east-southeasterlies 45 knots there for the Seward Peninsula. Wrapping back around, you can see 55-knot winds there coming across the eastern Aleutians. And for turbulence, look for considerable moderate turbulence here, pressing in toward the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, and right across Prince William Sound, south central Alaska, right up to the Yukon Delta there, and down toward Kodiak Island, as well as along most of the Aleutians.